we felt that disappointment. We felt that failure. And but we had this idea and we were aware of that. And fortunately for me, I was with one of the leading mindfulness teachers out there, so he could help even model this for me. But we had this idea and we didn't want to let it go. And so we had that structure we realized of the mindfulness based stress reduction program. And so we took that structure and turned it into a workbook, which has now helped over 250,000 people around the world. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to dive into something essential yet often overlooked, and that's called emotional first aid. This concept or metaphor is something similar to what I've talked about my entire professional career. And I first heard the term from Guy Winch, who gave a really amazing TED Talk. And he had us thinking about how often we neglect our minds while putting so much focus on our physical health. So I want to share a quick story. Growing up, like many of you, I was taught to prioritize physical health, whether it was being told to brush my teeth in the morning, in the evening, or putting a Band-Aid on when I got a cut, or maybe taking certain medicine when I was sick and had to stay home from school. It was automatic, right? But we rarely, if ever, talk about our emotional well-being. And it's a common story, and it's all throughout this country and many countries. And to be honest, the importance of emotional hygiene never really hit home until later in life for me specifically. So today, I want to introduce the idea of emotional hygiene, the practice of caring for our minds with the same urgency and attentiveness we give our bodies. So think about this. From a very young age, we're taught to care for our physical health. We brush our teeth daily. We do that to prevent cavities, something physical. When we get scraped and fall off a bike, we get a cut. We go in, we wash the cut, we pay attention to it. Maybe someone helps us. We're taught to wash our hands to prevent illness. That was never so apparent than over the time of COVID. But we rarely, if ever, are taught to care for our emotional health. So I remember watching a young child when I was young scrape his knee and instantly cry out for a Band-Aid. This is when my kids were young, and I remember on the playground, I mean, my kids probably did the exact same thing. It's instinctual. When something's physical, you feel it physically, you see it on the outside of your body. I remember one time I was riding my skateboard down a hill, and it was a pretty steep hill. And I remember falling off the skateboard and kind of like being seeming like I was okay. But once I looked and saw the scrapes of my arm, I started bursting into tears. But what happens when we face emotional pain, like a tough rejection or a failure? There's no instinct to reach for some kind of emotional first aid because we were really never taught how. We didn't grow up being aware of our emotions and being able to name them or figure out what we want to do with them. So here's the question. Why don't we teach emotional hygiene along physical hygiene? So again, in some progressive schools, they're starting to incorporate social and emotional learning right now, but for most of us, it's still not the norm. It's not taught in the corporate world a whole lot. I mean, maybe a tiny bit more, but not as much as it could be. It's certainly not taught by our politicians. Imagine if, along with brushing our teeth, we were taught how to handle feelings of rejection or disappointment or self-doubt. It would make such a difference in how we manage life's ups and downs. So let's talk about this for a second. Let's talk about psychological injuries. And by the way, when people talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, I love when we think about it like an injury because it really is. Then we make a real connection between the personal and the physical. I mean, sorry, the psychological and the physical, because there really is this interconnection. There's not really a separation. We all experience these types of things: rejection, failure, loneliness. But unlike physical injuries, they're often dismissed and overlooked. We treat a broken leg with care. We give it time and attention to heal. But when someone feels broken emotionally, we often hear things like, oh, just walk it off. Imagine saying that to someone with an actual broken leg. It sounds pretty absurd if you think about it. So loneliness, that's a really powerful one. And Mother Teresa said years ago, like the greatest epidemic we have is loneliness. And now it's been brought up in our current culture a whole lot. They're feeling isolated. And when we do feel that sense of disconnection or separation, our mind oftentimes plays tricks on us. And that could be the same in a personal relationship, an intimate relationship with someone. That could be within a family, that can be within a community, or that can just be you really are living alone. And there is a great feeling of loneliness as well that accompanies that. It creates a little filter if you consider it. I oftentimes in my work talk about this thing called the emotional loop. And the emotional loop is certain thoughts, emotions, sensations, and actions. And the feeling of loneliness creates a certain interpretation that can amplify our insecurities, leading us to take like a neutral, even positive interaction sometimes as rejection. It's like we go into this trance. It's like we're wearing tinted glasses that make everything look darker than it is. We start to assume others are less interested in us. And this fuels a cycle for us to, again, back to that emotional loop. We start to pull away. We start to isolate. And as we start doing that, we start feeling even more alone. And our mind starts to put more filters on, or deepens the grooves of the filters. And we can often misinterpret the intentions of those around us. And it's not just emotional. Loneliness, and this is what I really want to get across in this podcast is the connection between our emotional health and our physical health. And loneliness impacts us physically. Studies show that chronic loneliness increases the risk of early death by 14%. And that's on par with the risks of smoking. And even there's plenty of studies that show that loneliness, or that feeling of disconnection and social isolation, can be more impactful than smoking. And you can just imagine the stress that puts on the body. And the stress on the body, of course, squeezes around our organs and increases our blood pressure. And we start grabbing for certain fatty foods to temporarily reduce our cortisol. And so then that becomes harder on our bodies. It's all connected. So just think about that for a moment. Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break to check in and talk about a program that's very important to me. I've been working with people for over 20 years, and in that time, what I've realized is that uncovering emotional healing, strengthening emotional health, and building resilience works best when we're learning practical skills that are evidence-based, supported by a caring community, and have access to daily guidance and support. That's why I built my emotional health coaching program. If you're someone who's ready to take your emotional health to the next level, you're tired of yo-yoing around, you want to start really making real progress, whether it's building resilience, managing stress better, or simply feeling more balanced, you can get a free consult for the program. Just click the link in the description below to schedule your session and learn how we can support you. Now, let's get back to the episode. Okay, now I want to talk about building emotional hygiene practices. If we don't tend to our emotional wounds, they can fester and grow like stress grows in our body. And this can impact our overall mental and physical well-being. Just like we have routines to protect our physical health, we can develop certain routines or tendencies or habits to care for our emotional health too. So let's use an example like failure. Our minds often trick us into thinking that a failure defines us, that we're incapable at that point, or unworthy, or that it will never work out for us. Years ago, I experienced firsthand something that you may or may not know about me. You may be new to me and may not know a whole lot about me, or you may have been following me for decades and you still may not know this story. My colleague Bob Stahl and I poured our hearts in 2004 into creating an online mindfulness program for anxiety. This was before any platforms were out there. This was way ahead of its time. It was a certain company called Alive World, which had amazing people who were running it. And they had great hearts and great intentions. And we were couple of the people that were helping build programs for them. The idea was to build programs, and then people would come to their platform, and that's how it was. So Bob and I, Bob being one of the leading mindfulness-based stress reduction teachers in the world at that time, just right underneath John Kabat-Zinn, and he trained tons of teachers, including myself, created this mindfulness program. And what happened was the company was way ahead of its time, and it turns out that they folded. And that was a failure that may have just kind of stopped us at that point. But we had this idea that we had this structure that was there. And or but by the way, before we had that idea, there was disappointment. We would work pretty hard on that. We had great plans for people coming to how exciting this new technology, online platforms, and but it didn't work out. And we felt that disappointment, we felt that failure, and but we had this idea, and we were aware of that. And fortunately for me, I was with one of the leading mindfulness teachers out there, so he could help even model this for me. But we had this idea, and we didn't want to let it go. And so we had that structure we realized of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And so we took that structure and turned it into a workbook, which has now helped over 250,000 people around the world. So it's incredible how being emotionally aware can support a certain level of resilience through failure that can lead to profound growth and profound impact, not just on ourselves, but around the people, but also the people around us. So what can we do when we're facing emotional injuries? Here are a couple steps. Let's kind of make the rubber meet the road here for a minute. I remember when I was teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction, different mindfulness programs, and this term self-compassion arose. And self-compassion was about treating yourself with the same kindness and compassion you would offer a friend. If a friend faced a tough rejection or failure, you'd likely console them and encourage them. So it was about turning the tables on ourselves. So we want to learn how to do the same things for ourselves. So that's one thing that we can begin leaning into a little bit when it comes to our own emotional first aid. It's probably the foundation. We have to recognize that we're suffering, and we have to incline to support ourselves. So, I always give the example that if you were on a bike and you fell off the bike and you scraped yourself, and this actually happened to my wife as an example. I remember we were in Palo Alto, and in graduate school, car turned off. We had just gotten these new bikes. It was the first time we were riding these bikes together, and a car turned off, turned to the right, and she was going down the sidewalk and curled right in front of her, and she hit both of her brakes at the same time and flipped over the bike and slammed on her wrist. And fortunately, there was for us, there was a firehouse right across the street, and they came running out to help us. And what they did was they very gently and kindly asked her if they could, touch her hand, and they started kind of inspecting it, and they realized that she had broken um, her bones. So they helped us in that way. So like, imagine for a second, self-compassion is the same thing. We turn it on ourselves. We say, okay, we want to inspect with the same type of kind attention that an EMT or a physician, hopefully who is gentle in that way, would incline towards us and want to support in this case, our emotional health too. We want to do it the same. Recognize that we're not alone. A lot of people have bike accidents, right? Just like a lot of people have rejection and failure and these types of things. So we want to see it in the exact same way. So that's the first thing. The second thing we want to consider is, how do we break the cycle of rumination? When negative thoughts loop in your mind, it can feel endless. So try breaking that cycle with a small distraction, or by focusing on something that might be more supportive to you in the moment. It could be as simple as asking yourself, like, what might be supportive. That's that self-compassion, and that might be taking a walk, or calling a friend, or maybe practicing, if it's not that extreme, practicing some appreciative awareness for maybe I could have been worse. Fortunately, I have the written, like my wife's example could have the rest of my body that still operates, but in her example, it was you wouldn't move to appreciation until you really move towards becoming more stable. And the same is it goes for us emotionally. We wouldn't move towards appreciative awareness or something like that until we supported ourselves in becoming a little bit more stable. I always tell people in my Uncover the Power Within program, I say, when, on a scale of one, when your emotional amplification is on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 7, 8, 9, 10, then there's the great art of distraction might be really helpful. To move towards being with your emotion, or to move towards appreciation or some kind of positive thing, it's not going to connect. And so we need to kind of support ourselves with some distraction or some external support, and then we can move towards being with the emotion that's there. And another way to cut off rumination, by the way, is a fantastic study, and I also talk about it in the program quite a bit, which was a study that came out years ago by Norman Farb and his colleagues that put a few different movie clips in front of a randomly assigned group of people. And the movie clips were incredibly sad movie clips. Movie clips of a mother watching her daughter die, and from terms of endearment, and a son watching his father die after a boxing match from, why am I blanking on that name of that now? I'll remember it as soon as I stop trying to remember it. And then there was just kind of a neutral one. So both really sad. And the group that went through the program that taught being more emotionally aware, it was a mindfulness program, showed statistically significantly lower results on the Beck Depression Inventory. And you might ask, like, why is that? They also studied their brain activity and found that they were activating a different part of their brain. It's fascinating. So the group that was, let's say, in the cognitive program, they saw those movie clips and they might have been self-referencing. What does this have to do with me? Oh my God, what about someone might die in my life? And their brain started feeling a little uncomfortable. So they wanted to get away from this uncomfortable feeling. And so we had more activation. We had more higher scores in the Beck Depression Inventory. They were showing a lot of activity in this part of the brain that was called the narrative network. And so they were, again, their brain was storytelling at that point. The other group showed activity in the part of their brain called the insula, which was right behind the prefrontal cortex, which that what they were likely doing is mapping the emotion, being aware of the body, and that dialed the rumination down. So the reason I tell that story is because for you to understand that there's an inverse relationship with being present with what's here and the rumination that might be there. So when we talk about reducing rumination, sometimes actually naming how you're feeling and being aware of how you feel physically, that could be a little shortcut sometimes in dialing down the rumination. The more you can be present with something, the more likely you are to reduce the storytelling. So practicing emotional hygiene isn't just about easing the pain in the moment. It's about building resilience and making it easier to navigate life's challenges. And the more we practice these skills, the stronger we become emotionally. And that's what we're looking for, because the stronger we become emotionally, it's like building a mental immune system in some way. I want to share another story if you'll entertain me for a moment. Years ago, I struggled with panic attacks and insomnia. I had the worst time going to sleep. And I found myself caught in a cycle of anxiety, feeling like I had no control. But I learned to become more aware of what was present for me. I learned a simple trick. It was more of an education of exactly the study that I just talked to you about, but the inverse relationship between presence and the rumination of the cycle of rumination that was happening, which is typically what's happening when panic and anxiety, and even depression. There's just this ruminative cycle that keeps that emotional loop going and spiraling us down. So for me, when it came to panic, anxiety, and insomnia, the ability for me to be able to name what was happening and map it, I call it a mindful check-in. I do at the beginning of most of my practices that I lead with people, is just noticing how my body's feeling, what's present for me emotionally, what's the quality of my attention, or I might note what's on my mind. And then I know that if I can stay here with what's here, so here's this feeling that's here, and sometimes I bring my attention to it. It's a certain feeling in my body. I don't quite have a name for it quite yet, but when but sometimes I do. Sometimes I notice there's a feeling of calm there, but there's also like a little fluttering of fear that's there at the same time. And when I sit in my meditation practice, that's basically a part of my meditation practice most of the time, is taking time out just to be with myself and to be aware of the feeling that's here physically, emotionally. My mind drifts off here and there. I take note of that and I come back to my body, my emotions, because I'm wanting to condition this emotional intelligence. I'm wanting to condition this um, this this awareness and connection to my emotions, because the more I am aware of that, the more I'll be able to regulate it, the more I'll be able to communicate it with my wife or my kids or my friends, the more in touch I'll be with what matters in the moment. And so it stemmed from this. My experience with my panic and anxiety, insomnia actually gave me great gifts, because it started to help me become more aware of what was present emotionally. And then I can learn to kind of breathe through them. I can learn to connect with something that was a bit more present, that's here, because I knew that if I stayed with what was present here, that eventually the rumination would go down. Eventually. And it's a little tricky, because you're in a trance when you're in these types of experiences: depression, anxiety, panic, insomnia. You're in a trance. Your brain's telling you this isn't going to work, right? Because it's part of the foundation of the emotional loop. There is self-doubt and self-criticism and negativity, which isn't going to work, because it's trying to help you. Doesn't want you to doesn't want any of us to fall prey to failure, and the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So we don't want to fall too hard. So let's just tell Elisha all the reasons this is not going to work, and to try different things. And it's just kind of like spurting out like saliva. But I know that if I was able to stay with that I could trust myself and get through each wave of the panic that was there and begin to dial it down. That was a great example of emotional first aid. Present what was here, turning towards myself, bringing a connection and awareness to something that was a bit more calming and grounding, versus giving in to the maelstrom of energy and activity that was there. Gradually, over time, I began to gain confidence and a sense of mastery. What I teach in my programs is intentional practice and repetition. It's not mine, not me. This is just logic. Intentional practice and repetition of something builds a muscle. Same way we kind of lift weights and we build muscle, or you want to get better at any kind of musical instrument, you intentionally practice and repeat it, and your brain begins to memorize the procedures. It's called procedural memory. And so these moments of emotional hygiene that I would practice and continue to practice in my life have taught me the resilience that I needed, and the understanding that I could continue to build and strengthen that over time. Each time we choose to care for our mental health, we're building our emotional resilience. And when we're resilient, we're more equipped to handle the challenges that life throws our way. So let me wrap this up for us. So I want you to remember that emotional hygiene is just as important as brushing your teeth, or getting enough sleep, or getting the exercise outside that you need to get. These small daily practices can make a huge difference in creating a healthier, more resilient mind. So next time you experience rejection or self-doubt, which is huge, it still hits me quite a bit, or self-criticism, try showing yourself some compassion. You say to yourself, hey, you name it, right? You name the self-doubt. You name how it's feeling for you. You become aware of it. You build that awareness. It helps orient you to what's here right now. And you pause and notice if you're caught in some kind of loop or negative thinking. And you say to yourself, hey, this is tough. And in life, there's these tough moments. I'm stuck in it right now. This is what it is. This is present for me. Hey, what would support me? What would be one thing I can do to support myself in this next moment? And just see if you can engage with that, whatever comes to mind. And imagine if we all prioritized our emotional health like this. What a difference it would make in our society, in our culture. What a difference it would make in our world, where we could take care of our mental health with the same diligence as we do our emotional health. And imagine if we all prioritized our emotional health like this. What a difference it would make in our culture and our society. What a difference it would make in our families. A world where we take care of our emotional health with the same diligence as our physical health would be absolutely transformative. Consider the impact it would even have on your motivation to exercise, to eat right, to sleep better, all these other areas of longevity. Our emotional health is the foundation for the energy and the motivation that we have for it. So thank you for tuning in today. I encourage you to reflect on one area of your emotional health that you think might need some attention today. If you'd like more tools and guidance on emotional resilience and well-being, check out the other episodes that are here and that will continue coming. Until next time, take care of yourself inside and out. Hey, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.